Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each week I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I'm thrilled this week for my special guest, Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. Kind of tell everybody who you are.
Hey, Todd, I'm super excited. So I am a wife and a mom, and I work in the education field and also in the nonprofit world. And so I'm like really intensely focused on helping people heal and move forward and create communities and ecosystems of
I,
healing and relationships.
I love that so much, and I'm super excited to dive into some of that today. But, whenever I have these conversations, I always do start with the same first question, and that is, as kids, we dream of what we're going to be when we grow up, and we have these grandiose ideas. And so, looking back when you were a kid, dreaming of what you were going to be, does it align at all with what you're doing now?
Uh, That is an amazing question, Todd. I would say maybe.
How so?
Well, by 15, I had moved out of my parents' home
Mhm.
and rented my first trailer house, right?
Wow.
And dropped out of school on my 16th birthday
Wow.
and left state to go find a life like I saw girls having on the other side of town.
Right.
And of course, you know what I found, Todd. Um, I found survival.
Hmm.
And so, but I had always dreamed of this middle class life doing some type of important work.
Hmm.
Uh, and so finally, decades later, I feel like I found that,
Hmm.
but I don't know if I could say when I was a kid, I wanted to be this or that or the other. I just wanted out.
Right, right. Well, I love, I saw talk to so many educators on here, but the part that interests me specifically about your story is also your love for the nonprofit area. And I think that that is such a needed, the more we can amplify that, the better. And so tell me a little bit about how your foray into nonprofit even started.
Yeah, Todd. So in 2011, I was 7 months clean and sober. I had three young sons, and we were in a trailer house that I bought for $1,000 that should have been condemned. So that was what the best thing I could figure out to keep us from homelessness. And
Mhm.
I was in college. I'd been in college for a decade trying to get a 4-year degree to be a high school art teacher. And I accidentally bumped up against this nonprofit in my town that got families out of poverty. And I went there because of a relationship that I had with a lady that ran a diaper ministry. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what are these people going to teach me about getting out of poverty that I'm not already doing? Right. I'm working local jobs, anyways. And so um, I went there, and on night one, I knew I had found something very different than what was happening. These middle class women kind of circled us all up and said, "Hey, here's the deal. We
Mhm.
see families struggling in our county, and we think the root cause of that struggle is poverty, and we want to solve it. And we need people like you who are living it to tell us what to
Mhm.
do." So instantly, right, they disarmed me and they empowered me. And so I started going back each week and had a pretty radical transformation from that. Graduated college, there was a job opening there. I applied and they hired me. And we got to be a part of building the largest, most successful poverty project like that in the country,
Right.
getting more families completely out of poverty. And
Mhm.
somewhere along the way, people figured out I was a pretty good storyteller. And so I started getting invited to go speak. And the organization that I'm with now, ESDAC, which is an educational service center, found me and said, "Hey, Rebecca, there's a lot of schools that are kind of baffled by some of the stuff these kids and families are experiencing. And nobody's talking about this in the way that you are."
Right.
In 2017, I left that nonprofit and went to work full time for ESDAC under the mutual understanding that they would let me build more poverty projects like that for families. And Probably in 2015 is when I really stepped onto the brain on poverty and the brain on trauma
Mhm.
and started looking at this brain science, right? And I was like, whoa. And then because of that fascination, I accidentally stepped into the brain on resilience, and I realized it is all about relationships, and that
Right.
we're coming at people and kids assuming this is a character issue when really it's a brain issue.
Mm.
And the science tells us you heal a brain thing with a love thing.
Right.
And so, because I didn't want to just go into schools and try and raise compassion, right? Let's get kids out. Let's wrap around families. And when I got to schools, Todd, what I found out was that our teachers were in pain
Mhm.
and they're hurting
Right.
and they're stressed out. And our system wasn't really designed to do what we're asking teachers to do now.
Right.
And so we've kind of been on a mission to build the capacity of the adults that are important in kids' lives. And that is both parents and teachers.
Well, there's so many things you said in there that resonated with me. I think one of the first things is, I found it interesting how there was a nonprofit who was trying to help people out of poverty, but then they came to you and said, "We understand that we need somebody who's actually lived it. Like we can't figure this out because we haven't lived it." And I think that's a piece that's often missed is to bring those who are currently experiencing that or who are working out of those areas into the conversation, let them be part of the process. And that's powerful to me. So my question for you is, they come to you and offer you that, and you're somebody who's working to get out of that area. And do you say yes right away? Or is it kind of those, nah, I don't really know. I don't even know if I trust you guys yet. Like, how did that process work for you?
They said that to everybody that night in the room. And what they were signaling to us was, we need you at the table. We can't do this without you.
Right.
You have valuable insight, and we want to partner with you to not only transform your life, but to transform our community.
Mhm.
And, in every project that we build, we set that culture and that climate right from the beginning, and helping the middle class people that come along to partner, that these families are not a project
Right.
and they have their own solutions. They just need an atmosphere and a space to start to unpack that.
Yeah.
And so, really, and I always think about school improvement, and we've been a part of that in our state, and I watched a lot of schools pull in kind of the kids that do really well at school, and they're like, "What would you change?" Well, don't ask those kids. Ask the 5 kids that are about to drop out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They have the answers that you're looking for, and there is so much healing in just being included and brought to the table to say, "Hey, what do you think you need?" Right? Because our
Right.
systems tend to say, we see your problem and here's the 5 things you need to do to get help from us to fix it. And so it's very power over instead of
Mhm.
power with.
Right.
Um, yes, but huge trust issues, Todd. I mean,
Mhm.
trust and hope are probably your greatest currencies for transformation,
Right.
and you got to start there.
Well, speaking of trust and hope, throughout this conversation, you've mentioned, dropping out of school, being sober, living in poverty, things like that. Have you always been really comfortable sharing your story, or was that something you had to grow into as well? Because I know some people I talk to, there's certain parts of their story where they're like, I don't feel comfortable sharing that, or I'm not ready for this. But you seem at a place right now where it's like, I'm totally comfortable sharing what I've been through because I know it will impact others. So when did that shift happen for you, or have you always been that complete open book kind of person?
Well, when you're a mom in poverty with addiction and abuse issues, the elephant in the room is that parents are terrified of school systems because we have forced school systems to police parents.
Mm.
And so, when you think about at-risk kids and families in our communities, um, it is a survival that parents tell kids, don't talk to teachers because they will take you away from us. And that
Right.
is a true story.
Yeah.
And so the people that need the help the most, we've driven them underground.
Mm.
So for me, though, Todd, my personal journey in 2010, I cycled in and out of hospitals with alcoholism. Like, I didn't have a drinking problem, I had a stopping problem.
Right.
Every time I'd stop drinking, I would go straight to the hospital with DTs, right? Like, I was physically
Wow.
addicted to alcohol. But I kind of got delivered from that. And I told God, I was like, everything on this side of that is a gift. I shouldn't even be here. And I'm going to run as fast as can run and do whatever you want me to do to try and make up for that. And I'm still running 10 years later. And so, but we all know of situations where people's stories have been used against them.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have these ideas that if people really knew this stuff about me, they wouldn't want me. But Brene Brown and the experiential trauma work that we do as a team with the resilience team at ESDAC, the opposite of that is true. When you invite people into your sacred ground, into your vulnerability, people are like, me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Me too. And you create a space for people to start to explore their own stories, right?
So then my question for you is, and this is one of the things that I talk about in each of these episodes as well, is when you are out there connecting with others, sharing your story, doing things like that, very often you can begin to feel like an imposter, or that doubt starts to creep in. Like, should I be the one telling this? There's probably somebody better. Like, how do you stay out of that mindset and keep any of those things from taking root in your own life?
I think for me, Todd, I think that shows up for human beings in multiple ways. And for me, I just really struggle. I feel like I'm a bad mom and I feel like I'm not a good wife. I think that imposter syndrome shows up for me at home.
Right.
Because I'm like, there's all this stuff happening and I train trauma informed and resilience. And so I just think, the news flashes is that we all experience that. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not good enough. What if they find me out? And I think it's just really important for us to just share that part of us too, because, we are the people behind the curtain. Right?
Exactly. I love that. Well, Rebecca, the work you're doing now with educators is something that is really special to me, because you alluded to it earlier when you said, when we started going in, we started seeing a lot of pain from the educators as well. And I couldn't agree more. And like you said as well, it's not talked about enough. So tell me a little bit about, when did that become a glaringly obvious thing to you that you were like, we have to do something to help these educators also?
Yeah, so the research for me that really gave me a basis for the body of work that we do is from Harvard Institute for Developing Child. And they're kind of their framework says, in order to transform the lives of kids, we've got to build the capacity of the adults that are important in their lives. And when I started going into schools and asking questions and having teachers share their heart and watching, teachers just break down, I started to recognize there was something else going on, and learning how to create a space for people to unpack that became part of the mission, because I'm like, holy smokes, we're in here talking about kids and you guys aren't okay. Yeah. And I think with school improvement, we just always jump to the kids, and teachers are like, and then we had in the trauma informed movement, this whole self-care kind of conversation. And I started recognizing pretty early on that was also almost it was almost insulting for teachers, because teachers were like, yeah, just add that to the list of crap I'm not going to get done today, right? You're telling me my profession is so hard that I'm going to need to really ramp up the self-care, and I can't get 20 minutes to catch my breath and just sit and play with my 3-year-old while school's in session. And so we really started going after building communities inside of our schools of co-care, right? Because we need to be in, and I always tell administrators, I'm like, there is so much stuff that you could send out in an email that you're doing at staff meetings. And at staff meetings, you guys can watch a video about some humanity thing and just talk about it. Yeah. Like outside of work, let's just connect, because it's that trust that creates the glue that will help our schools get through really hard times, because there are going to be hard times. And if our staff doesn't trust each other and they're not invested in each other's lives, there's breakdowns from that, right?
Yeah. Man, you are speaking my language here. I'm listening and I'm like, oh, I could just talk to you all day long about all these different things. And what I love about this is I've got personal experience doing some of these things you're talking about and seeing the effects. And so I think that's why what you're saying really resonates with me. And so for anybody listening, what I would say is definitely look into the things that Rebecca's talking about. I know that they can also go and look at SDAC's website. And for those listening, that's ESSDACK. And I know that there's tons of resources on there, but as we close this out, Rebecca, one of the things that I love to end these conversations on is I believe as humans, there are things we hold true to ourselves and are deep in our hearts that we always want to leave people with. And so for anybody listening or watching today, if they only walk away with one thing today, what is your one thing for them?
Todd, I think that I want to just kind of put into this space that parents in poverty aren't anti-educational. They're just pro-survival.
Yeah.
And that with the trauma-informed movement and frameworks, we can understand how to heal brains so that kids can learn, and also help our staff with some of the heartache and the frustration that they're carrying. We can do that. You know, we don't need a hill to save us, right? We can do that right inside of our own buildings. And I would also just add, Todd, that our website for our work is theresilienceteam.esdac.org. So that is, and I'll send you some links, but that's a place where they can go and find just the trauma-informed poverty work. So I know I'm talking too much.
No, not at all. Well, Rebecca, it has been a joy getting to talk with you today. So thank you for coming and being a guest on Tell Your Story.
Yeah, Todd. Hey, thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. I hope today's conversation with Rebecca has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every